Hello everyone, my name is Jente Ottenbergs and today I would like to answer this question with you. What explains the evolutionary success of birds? But before we start, I will briefly introduce myself. As I said, my name is Jente and I work as a lecturer at Wageningen University where I study the evolution of geese using genomic tools. Today, however, we will not focus on geese, but we will look at all species. On this figure, you can see the different bird orders and how they are related to each other. The most important feature in this figure is the thick red line, which indicates when most groups originated, about 65 million years ago. And you might notice that this date coincides with the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. Indeed, the extinction of these animals opened up many ecological niches that were filled up by the ancestors of modern birds, allowing them to diversify into the amazing variation we see today. And you might have noticed that I said non-avian dinosaurs, because technically birds are dinosaurs. This is nicely illustrated by the phylogeny you see here. Dinosaurs are usually split in two groups, ornithischians and saurischians. Birds are most closely related to the saurischians and are thus embedded within the dinosaurs. In other words, birds are dinosaurs. Something to keep in mind for the remainder of this video. But to get back to our question, what explains the evolutionary success of birds? We can compare birds with other animals, like reptiles and mammals. What makes birds so different? In this video, I will argue that the main difference is feathered flight. And I will discuss three aspects. First, the origin of flight. Second, the impact of flight on other traits. And finally, some benefits and consequences of having a flying lifestyle. But let's start with the origin of flight, a problem that also haunted Charles Darwin. His critics asked him, what is the use of half a wing? Because Darwin envisioned evolution as a gradual process of which traits change over time. But what would a bird do with an incomplete wing? In The Origin of Species, he made a very important observation. He wrote, it's important to bear in mind the probability of conversion from one function to another. So perhaps feathers evolved for one function and were later co-opted for flight. This idea is supported by some recent discoveries of feathered dinosaurs in China. Here you can see one of the fossils. By exploring the fossil record, biologists have found evidence for the different stages of feather evolution. And if we put these fossils on a phylogeny, we can see how feathers evolved from very simple filaments to the feathers we know today. But what was the function of these feathers? The main ideas at this point are insulation, so keeping the body warm, and courtship display, as you can see in this figure. Later on, the feathers turned out to be useful for flight. Now at this point, some of you might be thinking, well, what about bats? These mammals can also fly, but they're not so successful compared to birds in terms of species richness and distribution. Well, the main difference between bats and birds is the structure of the wing. Bats have a very thin membrane that doesn't provide a lot of insulation. So these animals cannot survive in very cold climates, or they have to hibernate. Birds, on the other hand, can survive in very cold climates because the feathers can keep them warm, as you can see in this Arctic skua that lives in the high Arctic. Now, the evolution of flight has affected several other traits. Let's have a look. First, the body plan. If you look at the body plan, it's surprisingly uniform across bird species. Here you see the common pheasant, but if I would show you another bird species, the skeleton would be roughly the same. It seems that flight constrains the evolution of the avian body plan. However, there's a lot of diversity in the morphology of beaks and legs, as you can see here in this figure. We will discuss this variation, which is related to diet, in the next video. Second, flight limits body mass. It takes a lot of power to get a body into the air. Mathematical work indicates that the limit is about 15 kilograms, taking into account the wingspan and the muscle mass of birds. This estimation fits nicely with observations, such as this trumpeter swan, one of the heaviest flying birds. We also see that when birds lose the ability to fly, their body mass can increase. This is nicely illustrated by the ostrich and the elephant bird that is now extinct. But they still fall short of mammals, such as the elephant, at about 5,000 kilograms. In addition, birds have hollow bones, which is beneficial for flight because you have a very light skeleton. Here you can see the skull of a rhinoceros hornbill, and you can notice that there's a lot of hollow spaces and networks of fibers that provide support for the skull. Of course, flying is very costly, and birds need a very efficient respiratory system to deal with this. When inhaling, air accumulates in several air sacs, as you can see in this figure. When the bird exhales, some of the air flows into the lungs. This ensures that there is a steady supply of oxygen, allowing the birds to fly at high altitude, where there is less oxygen. For example, the bar-headed goose migrates over the Himalayas. Finally, the reproductive system. This is also adjusted to flying. In some species, females have only one ovary, mostly on the left-hand side of the body. And in males, the testis size varies throughout the year. When migrating, the testes are small to save weight, but during the breeding season, the testes grow to supply sperm for reproduction. Now, flying also provides several benefits. A very obvious one is migration. Birds can fly long distances to find food, and in some species this results in epic journeys, as you can see here in the bar-tailed godwit. This specimen flew almost 30,000 kilometers across the globe. Well, one function of feathers that we already discussed is insulation. It keeps the birds warm. But feathers can also be useful in camouflage, as you can see or maybe not see in this owl. But it can also be the exact opposite. Very bright colors can attract the attention of the female. So the important lesson to remember from this video is that feathered flight constrains the evolution of certain traits, but it also provides a lot of important benefits for the birds.